शुरू कर देते हैं अपना डिस्कशन।
Please start, sir.
हाँ जी। Uh, Very warm welcome to this session of DCE, that is Diploma in Creative Writing in English. Dear learners, as you know that diploma in very good morning, Karan. Diploma in Creative Writing in English is one of the earliest programs which university offered way back in 90s, and this program has been very popular since then. There has been a lot of demand of this program. Previously, we used to have another diploma program which was parallel to the diploma in creative writing in English. That was diploma in creative writing in Hindi. So that was wound up for some reasons, and now this particular diploma is there. So all of us are aware as to what is the objective of this diploma program. That is to apprise our learners with the creative writing. What is creative writing? How the creative writing is different from other forms of writing, and also what goes into making writing creative. So obviously, this is very helpful to those budding writers, aspiring authors. So keeping in mind their needs, the areas which have a lot of scope for creative writing, this program has been conceived and developed. So in this process, we discussed yesterday uh, about the preparation of press copy, which we usually call the preparation of manuscript (MSS). But after preparation of the manuscript, there is a role for the publisher. Publisher also ensures that the uh, publication that he or she is going to bring about should be conforming to the set norms and standards of the publishing industry. So, therefore, we yesterday discussed uh, what happens when the final copy, which the author feels that this is the final draft, when he or she forwards it to the publisher, then another round of proofreading uh, takes place. Proofreading, correction. Usually, there is at least 2 to 3 proofs are checked, and only then it is treated to be a product ready for the printing. So, but at the same time, there is a role of editor in it, and the editor ensures that the contents are in order. Sometimes there is a team of editors, like there is a language editor, there is a format editor, and then there is content editor. So all these three put together makes a team which goes through the manuscript and see for the appropriateness, whether it is uh, you know uh, conforming to the topic that has been chosen to be dealt with. So there are a lot of processes which goes on simultaneously. Uh, then there is one area which is very closely looked into, that is the referencing part, or we call footnoting. So there is end page noting, there's end unit noting, there's end footnoting or referencing. Sometimes we have seen that the footnotes or the references come at the bottom of the page where the reference occurred. But at times we see that all this the references appear at the last page, at the end of the either unit, small chapter, or sometimes it is at the end of the entire book. So that depends upon the author as to what he or she would prefer, whether it is and chapter noting, whether it is footnoting, that means end page noting, footnoting, end page referencing, or the chapter end referencing. We also discussed about the indexing because you might have seen in the publications there is an index. So index actually has many criteria, many factors. Sometimes we have the index where the important terms which have been used in the chapter or in the unit or in the book are given in alphabetical ascending order. So all sometimes it is according to the major terms which have been used or technical terms which have been used. Sometimes then there is another use of indexing the literary works, that is to trace them. Say for example, one visits the library, and how do one searches for an appropriate title? So there are titles which can be searched in preference of the author's name. We have titles sorry, which can be searched by the title of the book, and we also have indexing pattern where we can search the book or the book by the nature of its contents. Say, for example, if some book has used some phrases quite often, or it has certain statements which are unique to this particular book, then those can be put into the uh, trace, and then one can find it out whether the book is available, the book is issued, or what is the status of the book. Let me just share with you that what we initially said, like the corrections were like while correcting the manuscript, the proofreader makes a lot of correction. So those corrections are made in a very specific manner, and those are marked with certain predetermined signs. So there is a list of there is a whole details about the signs, which sign will be put on the manuscript. Or say, for example, if there is a gap between the two letters, then there's a different sign to indicate that gap. If there is gap between paragraphs, then that will also have a separate indicative sign. If something is to be inserted, then that is therefore with indicated with a different sign. And if something is left out of the text, which was there in the manuscript, then there is another sign, only CMSS, like that. So this is a bit, if you go through your SLM, there is a page which gives all these correction signs. And after the corrections, when the first correction has taken place, it again goes to the publisher, and publisher will go through, see the corrections and incorporate them, and again send the second proof. So the process continues. Sometimes, if there is need, then the third proof is also issued. So what I'm trying to say that these days we don't use the galley print or subsequent print and then another following print. Usually now it is done on the computer, and there are softwares which allows you to edit the manuscript. And when editing the manuscripts, it has certain special functions, some technical functions. So those can be easily grasped, and whatever corrections are made, those gets automatically highlighted, and they are underlined, and those are indicated in the margins of the manuscript or the text which is printed there on the screen. So that is now highly modernized. Same is with the indexing. If you go to big libraries, there is a very advanced system of indexing. There are trained software people who data entry people, and there is every assistance at the counter itself. You can simply request, I want this particular book, or there may be computers, so you can yourself avail the facility, and you can search for the book by its title, by author's name, by year of publication, by place of publication, by the publisher's details, by the technical terms or words which have been very often used in the book or the chapter or any creation. Or if it is a storybook, you can enter the title of the story, then that will be the information will be there. Secondly, we also discussed yesterday feature writing. So we discussed feature writing because feature is a specific case of writing. It is quite different from the poetry, from prose, that is, I mean to say, fiction or memoir or reportage, etc. Feature is something which is having factual information, but it is presented in a very lucid style and substantiated with a lot of supplementary information which is gathered from different sources and then presented in a style that has readability, that is interesting, that catches the interest of the readers, as well as it sustains the interest of the reader. So we discussed a couple of traits or a couple of characteristics of the feature. Then we also discussed various types of feature like investigative features, features which are based on women, features which are based on other themes such as child labor. But we also discussed in detail that a good feature writer or a budding author or writer should not confine himself or herself, should not have constrained view. So they should be more interdisciplinary, they should be more multidisciplinary, so as to have a larger choice of subjects or topics to write features. We discussed that there are a lot of other interdisciplinary subjects like women and health, women and development, women and environment, women and media, women and sports, women and aviation industry. I mean, women and industry, women and share market. So there are a lot of why to just as a case study we discussed women. Otherwise, why just to have a constrained view, just to focus on the women? So we can also go beyond. We can talk about the uh, achievements of our country in the nautical science, in the aeronautical science. We are very advanced in the space technology. Why can't be there a feature on that? But as a case study, we discussed writing on women and what are the challenges to write upon such topics which have wider implications. But the young writers should keep certain things in mind. Those are biasism. So they should not be biased about particular community, creed, caste, color, sex. And when writing, they should come upon certain such use of language that it appears to be an inclusive attempt, inclusive writing. It shouldn't segregate or discriminate because if we talk about the women as a issue for writing, then it is a very challenging subject because we tend to consciously or unconsciously be biased about certain things. So those have no place. Then there was discussion about interviews. Very interestingly, it was divided in two parts. That was interviewing the rural women and interviewing the urban women. So there was a lot of difference between the two. See, because we, as an interviewee, as a researcher, as a young writer, budding author, uh, one cannot be very dominating, and one cannot be prescriptive, and one cannot be you know pre-conditioned about certain things, prejudiced against somebody's background, somebody's profession, somebody's dress, somebody's eating habits, and so forth. So the conclusion or the summing was that it is a challenging job writing on women, taking information from women is very important, but one must be conversational, one must be informal, one must put the person in absolute comfort, and then maybe in conversational talk or discussion, the piece of information is uh, obtained from the interviewee. That means, say, for example, if it is rural women, then one has to accordingly be polite, be sympathetic, be sensitive. Another point which I discussed yesterday quite emphatically, it was the culture or kinship uh, arrangements of the society, culture of the society. Sometimes one would not like the other person, other person from other community, or person from media, a person who is writing, who is an author from that world. Some people do not like them to, to share with them certain personal details as well as the details of their culture and society. So it is one should not cross that border. As a budding writer, yes, of course, you have very intense desire to become established. At the same time, you cannot be over, or you cannot overstepping, you cannot crossing the borders, which are limits, which are the privileges of the women in rural areas, or for that matter, women in urban areas. In urban areas, the women are perhaps little more open to the issues. They can discuss any issue, but that might not be the case with the urban women. So one has to keep that in mind. That doesn't mean that the women in urban areas are not modernized, are not up to date, or are a little out of touch or something. But that is their nature, that is their society, that is their culture. They do not easily become acquainted. They cannot become. They cannot converse freely with outsiders. But in the urban areas, this situation is different. Their women are far more open, far more participating in any conversation, in any discussion, or they are open to share the information about certain issues which may not be the case with the other women, rural women. So all those issues we discussed yesterday. In a nutshell, we can say that budding author or aspiring writer has a very great opportunity in feature writing. Uh, mm, so for feature writing, the basic ingredients are like information, which sometimes historical information, sometimes it is information about events, something as I mentioned yesterday also. If there is a feature on the independence struggle of India, then one must remember the major dates, the major events, uh, those who were prominently participating in those events. So there can't be any error or misquote about these details. Secondly, I also emphasized that as budding authors, budding writers, it is our responsibility to be respectful to any member of the society whom we approach for information, and also very sensitive, sympathetic, and polite, and sensitive particularly to the culture, to the value system of the society to which women are representing a larger or a bigger part. So that means if you go into rural areas, you want to interview some lady for some information, then you have to act in a very polite manner, and one there you have to respect their value system, their tradition, their way of behavior, their way of living, and all. So, to conclude, this is a very good area, but it requires great caution and care. And perhaps if one reads good features, then after reading them, one would come to know what a good feature reads like, and at the same time, then one would come to know that what are the challenges, what are the danger in, interview the women in both in rural areas or in the urban areas. So that was about the discussion that we had yesterday. Dear learners, being a student of the creative writing in English, today we will, you all know that in creative writing, another very important activity is the book reviews. Because what we discussed yesterday was the feature writing, and before that we also discussed about the manuscript preparation for press, making it final copy for press. That means when it is going for print. So moving ahead with that chain, we today have a topic that is the book review. So book review, we all know what is book review. That is to review a book. What is how is it different from editing a book, or how is it different from correcting a book, or how is it different from writing a book, or writing a collection of short stories, or whatever it is. So it may be called book review. Book here doesn't mean exactly a particular genre, but it can be poetry book, it can be fiction, it can be novel, or it can be a collection of essays, or it can also be a memoir, like that. So the very purpose of this activity of book review is basically to make the publication that it is conforming to the topic, and that it is conforming to the events that are quoted or discussed in the contents on the main body of the book. And also it is the duty of the reviewer that there is no error, there is no glaring error left, and there is no ambiguity, obviously. So we all know that book reviews are carried out by uh, newspapers, magazines, and other literary publications. Sometimes we have publications like Samiksha. There's a literary publication which is called Samiksha, and it only carries the book reviews. So there are different publications which carry book reviews. Uh, All India Radio and Doordarshan in their literary programs, also broadcast quite a good number of book reviews. So there, two, three people come with their reviews of two to three books each, and then they present them in the discussion in the studios, and they obviously they talk about the book, they talk about its objectives, they talk about how communicating the book is, or whether it is. Then they also speak about certain other aspects of the book. If the book has certain shortcomings, both in the contents as well as in its printing or publication, book quality, and all this goes into book reviews. So book reviewing is a very important literary activity, because if one hasn't gone through a lot of publications, a lot of book reviews, and aware of the cultural and moral values of particular society, then it becomes very difficult. Sometimes we have technical publications. In that case, say for example, if we have a publication on sports, publication on share market, or a publication on science, avionics, or anything, but if the book reviewer is not acquainted with that particular area, then then that person cannot, you know, give a good book review, and it will not serve the purpose. So we will discuss what are the qualities of a reviewer, what is going into book reviewing. Uh, One very important aspect is a book reviewer is not an author, you see, but he is not critique also. A reviewer is different from a critique. While critique looks into the uh, wider impact of the book reviewer goes through the contents very carefully, and as a very good avid reader, uh, but at the same time, the book reviewer spends a lot of time to study and to analyze whatever claims have been made in the book. So, book reviewing is something which is very different from editing a book or writing a book or critically examining a book. Critical examination is very different. Book review is quite different, and we all see it is an objective evaluation of the publication without any bias, without any personal preferences, and so forth. So, uh, if there is to be good book review, or someone is aspiring, some of our listener or some author is there who is aspiring to be a good book reviewer, then the very first condition is the integrity. What do we mean by integrity? Integrity, is particularly in this particular literary activity is unmitigated objectivity. Unmitigated. That means this objectivity is not rebuffed, is not neglected, unmitigated. So the objectivity prevails to its maximum. So that means the reviewer has not allowed any bias, in the book, in reviewing the book, in say evaluating the book. So this is very important, that the book reviewer is free from any kind of biases, and he only stick to the objectivity, that is the unmitigated objectivity. It means objectivity is not compromised with. So there, it is said that in book reviewing there is only one person who is the reviewer. So the reviewer is answerable to himself or herself. Only then one can give or turn out to be a good book reviewer. Apart from being unbiased, where the integrity of the book reviewer is at stake, because once the work is published, then there is also mention of the book reviewer. So if there is personal preferences allowed to dominate the fair opinions, it will be very open, and the readers will find it out, and the integrity of the reviewer is doubtful in that case. Second point, which is usually seen in the book review, that is undue criticism. Undue criticism. Uh, there may be criticism, but that has to be very objective criticism. So this is a very common saying. In someone say that if you are out to beat a dog, you are sure to find a stick. So that means if you take this statement otherwise, or this saying otherwise, if you don't want to beat a dog, you are sure not to find a stick. So that means when you have preconditioned or prejudiced opinion about something, definitely you are going to find out fault with that work. But if you are fair, if you are objective, like unmitigated objectivity is in your mind as a reviewer, then surely you will not be critical of the, or should I say that unnecessarily critical of the contents. So that is one. You see, sometimes what we do is just without any purpose try to say, oh yes, this was, and then we explain. Say, for example, if there's a review of a book which is written about the role of freedom fighter, role of peasants in the freedom struggle of India. So, if the peasants have sometimes, not been able to share information with the freedom fighters due to the fear or something, due to the very dominating presence of the troops. In that case, one cannot, directly criticize the peasants because if their life and properties at stake, maybe they are not that, outcoming to with the information. If somebody has, some criminal taking refuge in some house and taking the entire family for ransom, and if the police approaches the house owner, then sometimes house owner might not come with the information straight away. Say for example, this is a case which might be discussed in some book. So it's just a study. So in that case, we cannot directly blame the house owner because his family, his children, his wife, his parents might be at stake. If he does divulge the information, the criminal might kill them. So there, one cannot criticize, one cannot be critical of the role which was played by that household owner. Similarly, there are such situations where we do not take the real situation into consideration, and then make a statement that, oh yeah, there is a flaw, there is inconsistency, and so, like that. So it is a very responsible reviewing is one which is very objective, which respect the author's worldview, author's narratives, and before making any critical remark about that, one goes into the takes a deeper study of the work and then perhaps make a comment. So, of course, it has to be guiding. The reviewer comments must be guiding comments so that they give some new information to the author. They should be intrusive, instructive, inspiring, uh, and not somebody, as somebody say, they should be south wind, not an east wind. That means they should not be bringing a lot of commotion, but they should be bringing a lot of peace and tranquility to the author who has written the book. So that way, it is a positive criticism, positive reviewing, and that positive reviewing is always helpful to make the writings better, improved. In book review, there are certain flaws which have been very often noticed. Sometimes there are personal biases. What are personal biases? This is very important. Personal biases are like if the book is written about police, and if somebody has a bad experience with police, then the reviewer, if he had ever an issue with the police, then while reviewing that book, which is written about the image of the police, he will point out the negative uh, aspects of the writing, thereby, you know, thereby becoming biased or at the personal level. As a professional reviewer, there is nothing one can find. But even then, if there is personal bias, if, say, for example, the reviewer knows the writer or knows the publisher and not in good terms with the writer or the publisher, then there's definitely going to be a criticism. So this is not a fair criticism, it is dishonest review, and such dishonesty must not be allowed, must not be exhibited by the reviewer in his or her reviews. So there shouldn't be any personal bias. There are parochial biases. Sometimes uh, we come across certain novels, certain literary works where we see that the language, we see the language which is parochial, which is traditionally in favor or in eulogization. It is giving undue representation to one that may be a caste, that may be color, that may be creed, that may be sex, or that may be a group, maybe linguistic group, or maybe economically stronger group, or maybe socially very very dominating group, and so forth. So we have seen in a lot of Indian writings. There we see that sometimes there are statements which have been made by the writers, and often the reviewer, without going into the such details, the reviewer makes a very unwanted remarks which are socially, which are ethically incorrect. So their parochial vices means about the functioning of the society. The comments comes and those represent parochial mindset of the reviewer. In a lot of Indian writings, while the writers write about the internal structure of the society, they have done great research into it and come out with certain new facts, new revelations about the society, its culture, its traits, and its practices. But the reviewer, without going into that aspect and without attaching a lot of sensitivity to such details, he simply say, no, these are maybe without understanding them, either he can denounce them or maybe making a comment on that basis. Uh, s- Also, there are biases which are sexist biases. So sometimes, we have seen the language which is used by the author is very cleverly invented. So in Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, we see various characters like Portia, and when it was translated into Hindi, then the character is Purushya. Similarly, there are certain other characters which have been, adapted into Indian names, Indian environment names, so on. So if some characters changed from masculine to feminine, and some characters from feminine to masculine also. So that is also there in translations. So while making a critical review of either the original or the translation, without looking into why this was done, the reviewer will say, no, this has been done, this is wrong, it is not required. So those remarks sometimes, are not wanted, or at all. If such remarks have to be made by the reviewer, then he or she must go into the basic strategy of the author, writer, and the translator, and then see why it was done. Because particularly the translation of Merchant of Venice, Venice Ka Mahajan, Vanshpur Ka Baniya, etc. These are the Hindi titles. And if one goes into it, there's a lot of strategy in these translations, because those titles have been translated to suit the Indian readership. There has been a lot of criticism about such practices also. So, my point is that as a reviewer, it is important that one goes into the strategy of writing of the author, and then makes a comment. And similarly, if there is a translated version of the book, then why this has been translated in a particular manner, what has been typical use of uh, the names, those have been adapted to suit the local readership, local audience. So that must be that case where the reviewer should go into deep into the cause why this has been adapted in this particular fashion. Uh, there has to be, a very positive tone of the reviewer, because if the reviewer is straightforwardly denouncing the work, denouncing the writing, then it will not happen. It will not help the author. It will not help the publication to really become popular. So, of course, if there is a fair book review, it helps the book, it helps the author to have a larger acceptance in the readers' community, readers' world. So sometimes, there's a book about the Indian community that is residing in foreign countries. So they live in a particular style. They have their own culture, which they have carried, and which they have preserved over the years. So if there is a writing on those issues, on their lifestyle, then perhaps the writing cannot be criticized that their lifestyle doesn't conform to the advanced society of that particular nation, or the Indian community is still very conservative in their living. But on the other side, they are preserving their tradition, they are preserving their culture, language, and social norms. So the reviewer's duty is to look into that area also, and perhaps then only if he or she simply says no, Indians' lifestyle is not matching with the mainstream community, or they are not advanced, they are not progressive like that. So those comments are not, those are unwanted comments from the reviewer's side. So it is very important that reviewer uh, reviewer should also not pretend to be very scholarly. This is something very important, because sometimes we have seen that the reviewers, try to bring in their own scholarship. At times, they might be very big shots, very acclaimed writers. Also, sometimes they may be very uh, important people, person in administration, in world of literature. But they should not bring all that baggage with them while reviewing a book. While reviewing a book, one must be objective. In real sense, he or she must be a simple, first of all, a reader, and then critique to that work, both uh, keeping in mind the intention of the writers behind the book and also objectives of writing the book or whatever work that is, whether it is essay collection, whether it is a novel or it is a short story collection or it is book of poetry. So first of all, it is the duty of the reviewer to come to the level of the author and then think from his or her point of view and go into the background uh, upon which this particular creation has been based and then its objectives. Say, for example, there is a book or collection of short stories on the Adivasis of Jharkhand or Adivasis of Chhattisgarh or Adivasis of tribal areas of Himachal Pradesh or Northeast India. Uh, those are the narratives within the short stories or the dialogues within the short stories are very typical. They begin with a very different tone. They have a very specific choice of words and so forth. And I have seen myself that there were certain book reviews which appeared that no, the standard of the language is not up to the mark. But then the reviewer failed to note that basically the dialogues represented those people who were living in those particular areas, and the story writers had chosen to represent them through their style of narratives, the selection of words, and so forth. So the reviewer that way was not very objective, was not very positive because he failed to notice why this particular style of narratives, why the use of certain words, why the style is very different from the usual style which is prevalent in the Hindi or in those areas where there is Hindi is spoken as a dominating language. So one must be careful about the nature of I mean, about the contents, its nature, its background, and what it is representing. The point which I just thought to again re-emphasize is not to become too scholarly. There has been case with a lot of book reviews, whether these are poetry, whether these are short stories or the novels or the collection of essays or memoirs or any other genre of the creative writing. If the reviewer happened to be a big person, very seasoned author or seasoned reviewer, then he goes into showing that he is uh, a very senior person. He is a big scholar, and then he or she becomes more obsessed with the technical aspect or with the subject matter and forget its treatment. So one cannot ignore the treatment of the plot, treatment of the situation, as we mentioned yesterday. What is the situation of the writing? Then, if the language used in the writing, which is in consonance with the situation, in consonance with the characters, in consonance with the locales, and if the reviewer fails to notice even one aspect of these, then it will not be an objective or it will not be a sincere review. We all know that if one is posing too scholarly, if one is not honest, if one is not considerate of the author's intentions, uh, I think it is very difficult to become a good reviewer, and ultimately it doesn't pay. It doesn't make the review a good reading. So, to make the book reviews a good reading, I am particularly making this point. To make the book reviews a good reading, that means the readers must also have interest in reading the book reviews, because that introduces the books to the readers. But if they create a negative picture in the mind of the readers, instead of putting the right perspective of the book about the book, of course, if there are shortcomings, they should also be pointed out. Say, for example, if some details are too much, too lengthy in short stories, perhaps that may not be very that may not be very desired way of explaining the things. That should also be pointed out. That means if, the shortcomings should also be pointed out in the book reviews, but at the same time, the shortcomings should be properly, justified, and there should be proper explanation for that. But without ignoring all that goes into making work of literature, whether it is poetry, whether it is fiction, or it is any other genre. It is desired that the reviewer is very considerate, very conscious, and more importantly, having open view, uh, plus acquaintance with other subjects than his or her own area. Say, for example, if there is a book reviewer who is predominantly from the literature, and if there is a book, there is a collection of short stories or essays on computer science, or say, for example, there is a feature which is on the science or on the computer, but presented in a language which is a literary, which has literariness in it. In that case, the language will be used will be quite different, because you must have seen when machine speaks to one machine speaks to another machine, it speaks in slightly different way. So there is a case for gender, there is a case for numbers, there is a case for certain other grammatical categories or tags. In that situation, the reviewer has to keep it in mind, the 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 uh, the area, the theme, the plot, and its treatment, and its particularly locale and environment. So these are the prerequisites for a good reviewer. So, and at the same time, the reviewer must also know the different formats, different style sheets, or particularly with the references. And if there are shortcomings, the reviewer can particularly makes suggestions that such things can also be presented in this particular way. So that means a reviewer is also a guide, a mentor, and also a facilitator to the new publication. So this was all about uh, the first unit which we had, that was about the book review, and particularly about the mm, person who is going to review a book or review a collection of essays or something, or we may say a publication. So, if we uh, summarily understand it, then the very important point to with the reviewers is to be is his integrity. So integrity will be reflected if he is or she is not having undue criticism of the work and is without biases which are personal, parochial, or sexist. And also his tone and tenor is, the pro- promotional to the book. And above all, sometimes, there are reviews where the reviewers mm, do not go through the entire book. They just go through the titles and write the review. In that case, certain reviewers are caught in the web and they misquote the pages, they misquote the details which are there on a specific page. So this is very important that such approach is avoided, and we all know that an honest effort is always paying. It always brings glory, it always brings honor and credit. So same is the case with the reviewer. If we move ahead, then we come to the second point, which I thought we'll discuss about the book review. I mean, second aspect of the book review, that is the acquaintance with the other works on the subject. You see, this is very typical. Usually, such discussion will not be there, but it is very good on the part of the course program coordinator and the course writers that they have brought about this particular unit. What happens when we review a book? How can we review a book? If we just read one publication and talk about it, how can we point out merits and demerits? How can one say, yeah, this is correct, this is incorrect? How can we say this is good book? How can we say this is not good book? Therefore, a very important quality that is desired from the good reviewer is that his or her acquaintance with other works on the subject. Because if there are parallel readings, then putting the current reading or the reading in question in comparison with the other works, other readings, one can very easily say, yes, this is better, this is not up to the mark, or this is not matching this particular publication. It is very important that the reviewer, you know, has to judge the contents on uh, on the entire material that is provided, that is written by the author. It is not, as I just now mentioned, that partial reading of the book or chapters cannot make good review. It is important that everything that is written is read, and then only the judgment is passed. Now, why I said in the beginning that the acquaintance with the other works in the area is very important, because if one, if one would like to compare or make judgment, you know, then one can say, no, this is the book carries new revelations. The book has few more additions, and new knowledge has been provided. What is the basis to say all that? If this is the only book which me, for example, as a reviewer, has read, then how can I make a comment? Let me just make here a small detour from the discussion. We are we are Yes, someone has muted his microphone. So if one has not gone through the other works and get acquainted with those works on the same subject, you see, it is very difficult to make a comment that the current publication is very good or it is not good. So one has to know what is already said about this particular uh, area, this particular topic, this particular
Yes,
information.
sir.
So one can compare only when one has read something. If one has read something on that particular area, particular situation. Situation I am referring here to theme. I think we will use the word situation for the theme or for the plot. And secondly, if one is well read and acquainted with other works on the subject, then there can be comparison with the similar works, similar books. And one can say that in comparison to other publications on this particular area, the current publication brings about new information and it has few more important additions. So and also if one is well acquainted with the similar works in that particular uh, area, in that particular situation, then the gaps in the current publication or the book that is in process of review, those gaps can also be filled and information about those gaps can be given to the writer or the author. So these are very important points about why there is a need of acquaintances of the reviewer with the other works on this similar area. Now you see, if we look at the reviewer's task, uh, uh, then what is the reviewer's task? The reviewer's task is to judge, you know, the book or the literary contribution on the basis of its merits, so that the publication is able to make a contribution to the body of knowledge in the existing moment of time. In the existing moment in time, that means whatever present situation is of a particular of knowledge in a particular area. If I put it in simpler terms, if there are 10 books on, say, for example, on the um, women's role in mm, women's in the railways, for example, if there are 2 to 3 books there and they are talking about the contribution of the women in the railways, if there is a new book on the loco pilots, uh, women loco pilots, then we can say the previous books that were available on the contribution of women's in railway have so far talked about the women's role in offices, in hospitals, in nursing, in other areas. But this is the book which for the first time speaks about the loco women pilots in the high-speed trains. So this will encourage other girls, other women to come into the profession and take the challenge. Definitely, this will make a very competitive field to work, but it is bringing a lot of confidence amongst the women community of India. So that way, it can be a very positive review, and it will be very useful, very developmental in terms of bringing about new young girls into the profession. So this is what is the purpose of the good review. So why we said that it is desired that the reviewer should be well acquainted with the similar works in this particular situation. So the reviewer must be well informed. You see, sometimes the knowledge is changing. It is changing very rapidly. Statistics are changing. New inventions and innovations are taking place in the sphere of knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge is being created, but at the same time, we know that no person is perfect because it is very difficult to keep pace with the new knowledge that is emanating every day. But at the same time, it has to be the book has to be perfect, or a reviewer has to be a perfect person. He or she must update himself or herself. So they should be very well informed about about the details, about the knowledge on a particular subject. So as I mentioned just now, if we are speaking about Chandrayana, then we should know what happened with the Chandrayaan 1, what happened with Chandrayaan 2, and what are the objectives of Chandrayaan 3, which is in the stage of launch. But if one is not very well informed about the Chandrayaan 2, that there was some incidents, there was some setback, why it happened, and how this setback helped us to go more rapidly, more intensely to Chandrayaan 3, then it will not be a good book review. So if a book is about Chandrayaan mission, then the book reviewer should be very, very carefully examine the contents, and he or she must have the total detailed background of Chandrayaan concept, then Chandrayaan 1, 2, and now Chandrayaan 3. So that will come with a very careful study, with a regular study of newspapers or magazines or books or reviews. Or one must then also visit the websites of that particular organization which deals with this particular scientific development. This is just one. I'm just giving an example how uh, and what is the role, what is the need of being well informed as a reviewer. Uh, so now we come to the reviewer's desk. How does it look? You must have seen, if you have ever visited the traditional publishing industry, traditional setup of the newspapers, editor's room, the review editor's room, then you will find that there is a pile of books on the review editor's table. A number of books are sent by the authors to the review editors. So review editors' desk is always full of books, full of publication. So very first uh, task of the review editors is to take a uh, you know uh, glance of the books, and then he will choose the books, and then he will have a list of good reviewers, and according to the taste of the reviewers, the editor will assign the task of reviewing the books, like that. So all this goes into, so reviewers, the review editors is basically responsible for choosing a right kind of reviewer for the book, which will be definitely in consonance with the reviewer's ability, reviewer's acquaintance of the contents. Those are prevalent. Those are on which the book is based. Say, for example, if there's a book about poetry, then there has to be someone who is a good reader, who is a good poetry lover, who understands poetry. Because for a reviewer of the scientific literature, the poetry book cannot be sent. That doesn't mean that the scientist doesn't love poetry, but then the choice of words, the selection of words, and so forth, all those literary devices, etc., have to be also understood by the reviewer. In that case, the book will go to an appropriate reviewer. A reviewer has to be a good reader. This is very important that a reviewer is a good reader. If he has a habit of reading, is an avid reader of the literature or a particular branch of literature or particular type of literature, then he or she can be a good reviewer in that particular area. Uh, there's it is also not very uncommon. We also come across certain situations where a reviewer, sometimes if not very clear about the field, then he or she can consult on the experts in that particular area, and then give credit. Say, for example, in review, one can say, this particular opinion has been expressed by so and so, who is an authority on this particular subject. So, in order to make it unquestionable review, this technique is also quite useful. So, moving ahead, I think we will come to a point that what should be a checklist with the reviewer so that one becomes a good book reviewer. I was going to make a point a little while ago, but I just skipped that. We are talking about the book reviewing here. So please do not confuse it with the writing or the authorship, because as a writer, as an author, you also have a duty at certain point of time to become a good book reviewer, because that is also part of becoming a creative person. So, a book reviewer is also a creative person. Book reviewing is also creative writing. So here we are talking about the aspect of writing or authoring book review. So we may not be a book writer or author, but we may be a book reviewer. And book reviewing is also part of very intense part of the creative writing. So that means here we are talking about the book reviewer who may be a writer and author, but say, for example, one has to carry out the role of a book reviewer or review editor, then what should be his or her qualities, traits, viewpoints? That is what we are discussing right now. I thought I would discuss it in the beginning, but I just skipped it and we went into the discussion. So I am making it very clear that here we are talking about a reviewer or a review editor who is also a creative person. And since book reviewing is also part of creative writing. So, what should be the checklist with the book reviewer? I mean, what he or she must focus on uh, mandatorily and fix the criteria. So, first of all, or she, those who are reviewer or review editors, they should know what is the subject of the book. Sometimes, we read some book, some writing, we complete it, but we fail to notice the subject. So the reviewer should very clearly define or decide as to what is the subject of the book. As I have been mentioning, I mentioned about the uh, Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, which has been translated in, in Indian languages. many Indian languages, predominantly in Hindi. And while translating it into Hindi, a lot of names have been changed, and they have been adapted to the Indian situations. Why that was done? That point is very important. First of all, the subject of the book. Then, second important point which is to be kept in mind is the aim of the book. Why the book has been written? The book has been written to provide knowledge or to fill the gaps in the existing knowledge in the relevant area. What is the aim? Whether it is a new book in that particular domain, or the book has come as a gap filling exercise in this in the particular area. Then whether the topic, whether the subject has been well approached or not. Uh, as I mentioned about a case of the short story collection of the tribals community of Jharkhand, there was specific style of dialogues. Language was very different, tone was very different from the usual Hindi writings. And then some reviewer made comments that this is not a good selection of words, is not very good. The structure of the sentences is not very perfect. But when it was clarified by the right author, by the writer, that this was the style, this was the tone, this was the structure which was used by the people of that particular area. So it is important that these aspects are kept in mind. Then the reviewer must also be very clear, as I mentioned, that well acquaintance with the subject or the area will help to find out the lacunas or the shortcomings in the book. So those can also be highlighted. Sometimes there are facts and figures which are either irrelevant or not reliable. Most often, this happens with the books on trade and commerce, books on policy statements, books on uh, amendments. And there are a lot of amendments that are taking place, a lot of modifications are taking place. So one must be very clear. Every year, the financial figures changes in the budget, and the old becomes irrelevant, and there are new figures, new facts. So those must also be very clearly seen as to whether they are conforming to the period for which the publication is going to be used, or when the publication is finally published. So all these issues must be kept in mind by the reviewer. So we will now move to next issue with regard to the book reviews. So book reviews also consists, the style and relevance, terms of subject, style and relevance. So what is the reviewer's job? A reviewer's job is to examine a book with regard to its subject, style and relevance. So how do we first of all see whether the book is conforming to the to the subject? In terms of subject, the book is appropriate or it is not appropriate. So for that, it is required that the book is based on primarily uh, based on the facts, based on the theories. It is not misleading. So here, as a reviewer or as a reviewer's job, the budding reviewer, budding author of the reviews has to make sure that the books, which are there for the review, are not vague, are not misleading. They are not deviating from the subject that they have chosen to write upon. Means the title should not be compromised with in the treatment of the development of the book. So whatever promised in the beginning, that must be very clearly dealt with in the book. So this has to be ensured by the reviewer that the subject of the book, subject of the publication is particularly kept intact all through the discussion, all through the book. You see, sometimes there are books which are based on critical appreciation of certain government policy, certain publications, uh, sometimes upon media, sometimes upon the literary works of in a particular genre. So, while dealing with such publication, the reviewers has to ensure that the book deals or the book takes up only that discussion which is relevant to that particular subject. If it is about media, then it shouldn't be unnecessarily discussing about the printed textbooks, because textbooks are different. While media, that means newspaper, magazines, radio, television, these are the media. So one has to focus the attention on these only. If there's a book on the policy, on the development or the role of the newspapers in the development of a nation, then the role of the radio and television should not be brought into discussion. So the reviewer must focus that the book should focus on the title that it has, it is representing, and uh, uh, it shouldn't derail from its discussion, or it should not dilute its discussion and focus on some other area which becomes prominent in the course of discussion. Second is style. If the book is about, say, environment and sustainability, then there has to be usage of technical terms which deals with the geography, which deals with the biology, which deals with certain other areas of core science, and so forth. So it shouldn't be talking in very simpler terms, which are not able to technically define the events and the nature of happenings that takes place in that particular domain or in that particular area of discussion. So, for example, if we are talking about the exports of food to the Gulf countries, obviously there has to be mention about the meat and other things in that. So one has to keep it in mind that the subject uh, is the deciding factor for the use of language. So if it is about sports, then there has to be usage of certain technical terms, and without such terms, the discussion will not be complete and it will not be substantiating the facts, the happenings in that particular area of domain about which the author has decided to write. So the style has to be very, very clearly decided by the author, and this has to be ensured by the reviewer that the book has proper style, proper flair of language. Similarly, if there is a book on the for children, then the language, the flow of language, the usage of words and sentence structure has to be very simple yet very catchy, and it should be written in a style that children loves to read. So one has to decide that, and the reviewer's responsibility is to ensure that that style is properly mm, followed in the writings. Then, of course, there is relevance. Every writing must be relevant. No writing without relevance, without purpose, uh, can be no useful. So, as a reviewer, one must clearly indicate that whether this particular book is going to add to the domain of knowledge, or whether it is going to bridge the gaps which were there previously, or it is just a parallel book which is coming without any new knowledge or any new facts into light. So that has to be very clearly pointed out by the reviewer. And if the book is definite is making a good contribution, then that must also be highlighted that yes, this will be a new addition to the domain of knowledge, or this book will fulfill the long demands of the readers in this particular area. Then there has to be lucidity, directness, and attractiveness and logic. That means the book should justify its publication. It should the language should be lucid and it should be direct, attractive. Of course, depends upon the nature of the contents and the demand of that particular domain. So all these things are very uh, important. So relevance is slightly having a different view also. So the reviewer should know whether the book is relevant or not. So how can one make a decision whether the book is relevant? So the very first requirement, very first point that has to be kept in mind by the reviewer, uh, he or she must very clearly mention that this particular book is appropriate to this particular group of readers. Say, for example, if it is a textbook, it must be beneficial, it must be relevant to the school going or higher education learners, and then it should be written in a particular style as to fit into a particular age group. If the book is for 8 to 12 years of children going to school, then the language should be such that is understood and that is appropriate for that particular group of age group of students. Then sometimes a book becomes irrelevant because the cost is so high that it cannot be purchased by the majority of the readers. So that is also one criteria. Then newness of the subject matter, whether the subject matter has something new to offer. This must also be ensured. Uh, then there is a readership which is sparse, which is spread across geographical boundaries, political boundaries, and social constraints. Means there are books which becomes popular not only within or in the area where it is published, but in overall in the entire whole of the nation, sometimes whole of the continent, sometimes in the entire world. So usually the books have in political uh, situations, social situations, and geographical situations. They become universal. They have readership across the borders, across the political ideology or the geographical boundaries. And then the topicality of the theme. This is very important. I think it is very appropriate for the author to decide to take note that book is appropriate of the topical to the theme, because to one particular theme there are number of books written, number of publications, but each time a new publication comes, it has quite new things added to it. So the topicality of the theme, whether the theme has been properly represented in the topic or not. So the topic should be well representing the theme. There shouldn't be any confusion or there shouldn't be any misleading kind of impression in the topic. So number one, and whether the theme is relevant in the current times or not. So this is very important that the theme should be relevant, because if you look certain themes which were relevant 20 years back, 30, 40, 50 years back are not relevant anymore. We had a lot of traditions in the society which were not very good. So we tried hard to come out of them. And today we don't want to write much about them. Whatever is written, that is written. Some researchers can go into and bring about some facts about them, but by and large, we do not want to write any more of those things. So whether those are topical today or not, it is very important to decide. So it is very important that the themes which are relevant in the current times should be presented in the writings. So this has to be ensured by the reviewer. So once again, I am making a point that we are talking about the role and responsibility of the reviewer who is going to be a creative person. So one has to be a creative person in the book review as well. So as a book reviewer, you are a creative person. What are your role and responsibilities? That is what we are discussing right away. So, what is evaluative judgment? You know, once the reviewer has gone through the book, gone through the work of literature, then what is his or her duty? What will be done? So when it is the book is examined, then one has to make its evaluation. So what is evaluation? What do we mean by evaluation? Evaluation is an argument, is an analysis of the nature of the contribution of a particular publication in an area to which it belongs to. So, evaluation, it is not evaluating an answer script, but we are talking about the evaluation or evaluative judgment or reviewer's comment, let us call. What will be the reviewer's comment? Why there should be reviewer's comment? It is important because when the reviewer examines uh, the value and significance, what is the value of the new writing, new book, what is its significance, then he gives certain arguments. He presents certain analysis about the contribution to the field of knowledge that the book has been making to the particular area. So that means he or she must write something which highlights the contribution of the book in a particular area, or at the same time, it also mentions the shortcomings of the book, whether it is well produced, its getup is attractive or not, it is carrying new knowledge or not, it is adding to the existing knowledge in a particular area or not, like that. So all this has to be presented in a evaluative judgment. So this is the judgment of the reviewer as an evaluator. Uh, so there are different types of literary writings, you know, and how do one make distinction between evaluative judgment, or rather, if we put it in simple words, reviewers' comments on, say, fiction, on poetry or drama. So in fiction, you see, usually there is a story which is spread across a certain length and breadth of the scope of the plot, its plot, and then there is independence to the story writer to bring in new characters and deal with the plot, deal with the story, and finally heighten the um, readings and ultimately, conclude the fiction or the story. So these are the points which have to be written in the evaluative judgment by the reviewer. It is a cue in in implicitness. It is saying that a reviewer can talk about the plot of the story, can talk about the treatment of the story, can talk about the characters, and can talk about the uh, fictionalization or the fantasy that the fiction is having, whether it is there, and also he or she can talk about the brevity, about the concentration of certain factors, certain moods and situation characters. So these are the areas where which should be focused in the review. This is what is required for the reviewer. The reviewer must keep these aspects in mind while writing a judgment about the storybook. If you look at the poetry, what is poetry? Poetry is a compressed form of expression. It's in very few words. We say lot, we say a lot. So in few words, we say a lot. So there's a greater role for assumptions. So can we make the reader assume a lot through very few words? This is what is the basic quality of the poetry of a poem. If that is there, and can we build images and other fusions, and whether it sounds means it has a flow and a rhythm, a rhyme, and whether it makes sense ultimately or not. Because poetry is needs to be well understood, but sometimes if the reader fails to make sense out of it, then it is not relevant for that particular community of readers. So this economy of rich suggestion, sometimes we use words which have no replacement in the poetry. They have to be there. We use images, we use metaphors, we use epithets, and then we try to bring in experiences which can be felt by the sense organs of the readers. So these are the areas which should be focused in the evaluative judgment to be written by the reviewer. If it is a drama, so drama is very important play. It is staged. First of all, it is live. That is very important. It is live. There are characters which are speaking, which are behaving in a lively manner. It is performed. It is not narrated. It is performed. There is narrations to explain different situations, but it is performed. Then it is very important that there is action, there is emotion, and there are dialogues. So this has to be seen by the reviewer whether it is powerfully being conveyed by the characters, the theme is being conveyed by the characters or not. So the action is being performed as per the nature and role of the characters. Are they are there enough emotions that are in consonance with the role the characters are playing, and so forth. So these are areas. Basically, drama is talking about the changing conditions of life in a very fast manner. So this has to be seen. This has to be evaluated by the reviewer while writing a review about drama. So these are things which are central to the evaluative judgment of the creative genres like poetry, like fiction, or the drama. So, what is important in the evaluative judgment? What is important in the evaluative judgment? Evaluative judgment should uh, basically, uh, you know, focus. We are talking about writings. We are talking about authoring. So primarily, the reviewer, shouldn't come upon a conclusion without reading the text. This is very important. We are talking about drama, but we are not talking about play or stage. We are talking about a written drama. So until and unless the reviewer has gone through the entire script, entire drama, one cannot write about it. And one must be very sure if he or she is able to review, only then they should accept the task. Then they must have the creativity within themselves. They should be able to think and conceive what is being conveyed by the writings. So then they should also be able to analyze and comparison. As I mentioned, then if for that they have to be avid reader, avid listeners, avid analysts. They should do a lot of reading. They should be listening to others. Only then they can become good analysts and comparison maker. And finally, they should not have an ideology. They should desist from having an ideology, because if uh, they don't have a particular ideology, only then they can give the balanced judgment. And these are the characteristics. These are the traits of a good reviewer. So, friends, we come to the end of the discussion on block 2, which was book reviews. And book reviews are very important aspect of creative writing. Once you accept the role of book reviewer, you have a lot to perform. And if you are honest, if you are well acquainted with the subject and the earlier studies, earlier writings on that particular area, perhaps you will be able to do a great justice with that. So, with this, I would like to, come to an end of our today's discussion. I would like to invite our learners for interaction. If they have anything to talk about, uh, are our students there to discuss some issue? Do they have some issue to point out and discuss? Then I will just give an introduction of the block 3. So, if we so we will talk about the block 3 tomorrow, and in this we will discuss about the background of the material. That is about writing, about the um, travelogues, writing about the information that is required for the travels, travel guides, and we will also discuss tomorrow uh, about the choosing. So basically, we will discuss about the travelogues, travel writing tomorrow, and in which, first of all, we will discuss what is travel writing, what is required for becoming a travel writer, and then how do we locate an appropriate subject in the travel writing, because the travel writing is a very changing or fast changing area. Uh, you can see how the world is changing, world is squeezing, a lot of travel is taking place. So there is a requirement of the literature, there is a requirement of information. There are issues that relates to the business traveling, and there are requirement of the tourists who come to a very specific area. Those are called the armchair travels. And then we will also discuss the techniques of good travel writing. Who can be a good travel writer? What goes into a good travel writing? How do we do it? What do we need for that? We need map, tourist. tourism literature, guidebooks, and a lot of other things. We have to be a good reader, day to day happening, monitor library resources, net resources, and so forth. So if you do that, we can become good travel writer. So, and finally, in travel writing, there is a lot of scope for uh, materials which are not in written form but in other forms, like photographs, uh, like sketches, slides. If one of your friend has visited some place and he's not writing anything, yet he has a lot of recordings of it, maybe some scribblings, sketches, or slides. All those can be, used to write about the travel. So travel writing is a very professional area, and it requires quite mature and developed, imaginative power to write about what the tourists think about a place, about people, about country, what are their immediate requirements, what they look in the travel guides, what kind of information is more important to them upon arrival, what do they want, because there are a lot of travelers which are coming to India from Gulf countries, from Asian countries, from Europe and other countries. So once they land in our country, the whole lot of information is required for them. They need local maps, they need guiding literature, they need business literature, they need information about the people, about the culture, food, and other details about the climate. And there's a lot of tourism which is happening around our cultural events, fairs, melas, and other events. And those are taking place around the country. At the same time, there are literary festivals, there are literary gatherings. A lot of people from foreign countries are visiting our country to participate in the literary events. We know that there are very famous literary events which takes place on regular basis. So primarily the block 3 will be talking about primarily about the you know travel, what kind of material is required for the travelers, what goes into the what are the various types of travel literature, and also what are the various techniques, how you can create travel literature. So let us not just think that travel literature is not creative literature. It is highly creative, because when you talk about the literary richness of the country, you talk about the literary heritage of the country, talk about the culture of the country, talk about the development that a country has made in particular areas, then it becomes highly imaginative and creative writing. So sometimes the literatures with the stories, with the fiction is created specifically for the tourists, to attract them to different parts of the country, and then we present a bouquet of information which attracts the tourists, be it the food culture, be it the apparel, be it the clothes, be it different destinations, and so forth. So we try to, put in a lot of information about our, which is geographical information, cultural information, information about people, society, and the country as a whole. There are a lot of techniques to present that, and finally, we will discuss tomorrow about the travel writing that is from the allied material or allied sources. So, not purely in written form, but we can, you must have seen certain photograph books. They are very big volumes, they are very expensive. They carry very fine photographs, and then very precise description of those photographs. It is presented in a very logical style, and it makes it a kind of photo information book. So these are very important. And sometimes we have sketchbooks also. They also speak a lot about our creativity. So we will discuss all these things tomorrow. So if there is no reaction from our learners, then I would assume that they have no question. So in that case, we will wind up this session. Thank you, thank you. So with this, I'll wind up this session for today. We'll meet tomorrow about travel writing as an area of creative writing, where we talk about the different types of travel literature, sources of travel literature, techniques of travel writing travel literature, and also uh, non-conventional sources about the travel literature, which are the photographs and sketches. Thank you very much to be with me in this particular session. So we'll meet tomorrow. Have a good day.